Welcome to tonight's webinar on Careers in Conservation Part 2, where we will be hearing from a range of fantastic speakers from Cheshire Wildlife Trust, all about what their day-to-day life is like working in the conservation sector. So last year we hosted Careers in Conservation Part 1, which was all about CVs and cover letters and interviews and advice about how to get into the sector, which you are welcome to watch back on our YouTube channel. But yeah, after part 1, many of you said that you weren't sure what area of conservation you wanted to go into or what type of roles actually existed. So I have summoned a few of my wonderful colleagues at Cheshire Wildlife Trust to give you a bit of an insight into some of the different job roles that exist and what they entail, what they get up to day to day. So yeah, for those of you who haven't met me, my name is Becky Williams, and I'm a Wild Network Officer at Cheshire Wildlife Trust. And since this is a day in the life of, a bit about my role. So one of my goals is to encourage people to care about wildlife and to help tackle nature loss in their local area. So I organise various training workshops, networking events, webinars like this one, all to sort of give people the skills and knowledge to support wildlife and restore habitats that are in decline. So through my work, I get to meet and work with just such wonderful people through something called the Wild Network, who are a community of people across our county who are all doing their bit to help wildlife. And I'll mention this a bit more at the end, but you can find us on Facebook at Cheshire's Wild Network. And if you haven't already, you're welcome to sign up to our monthly mailing list where I send out all sorts of stuff, lots of upcoming events, workshops, wildlife guides, funding opportunities. Hopefully something for everyone would be the dream. So I'm really excited to introduce our lovely panel tonight from Cheshire Wildlife Trust. So first up, we've got our ecologist, Robyn Hargreaves, who will be explaining how she surveys and monitors a huge range of species and habitats to inform lots of different projects in the future. We're then going to hear from Jack Helsby, who is a senior living landscape officer, and Jack helps to manage and restore habitats on our nature reserves and our project sites. And then finally, we're going to hear from Faye Kelland, our Wilder Communities Officer, who's in our advocacy team. And Faye engages and supports lots of local groups, campaigners, all to sort of drive environmental action. So I feel like I've assembled the dream team, the dream squad, and hopefully a real range of backgrounds and stories. So I'm going to stop talking now and I'm going to hand over to Robyn. So Robyn, if you want to take control of the screen, and yeah, over to you.
Hello, thanks for coming. This is going to be a whistle stop. I have a lot to say that I don't think I'll get through, but that's okay. I thought I might just give you a bit of an overview on ecology in general, and then I can tell you a little bit more about my role, because most ecology roles are in the private sector. So, or public sector actually as well, there's Natural England. So just to a bit of background, why do ecologists exist? So certain species and habitats are protected under either EU, UK or UK law, and they can also be protected under the local planning system. I've just put some like examples on the screen, but there's so much detail, the screenshots are almost worthless. But there's got the Wildlife and Countryside Act, so a lot of species are protected under that. The map at the back is meant to be a map of some sites of special scientific interest, which is like sites that are protected, habitats that are protected. And then at the bottom, we've got the UK Biodiversity Action Plan, which broadly has protection plans for a bunch of different species and habitats. So the existence of these legal protections means that if you want to take out any action that might affect those species or habitats, you will need help from someone with specific expertise in those species and habitats. And that's where we come in. So a lot of ecologists work within the planning system, so largely for developers. If they're coming in and trying to develop land, they need ecologists on side to make sure that they are avoiding and minimizing harm and proving to mostly planning authorities, but within the local council, that they have like seriously considered what is there and how they're going to address that harm. So my specific job within the Wildlife Trust is slightly different. Because I work for a wildlife trust, we have a little bit more of a conservation focus. So we're a team of 7 and we still have clients, but we also, some of our work is also internal within the trust. So we do, and also some of our clients are like more focused on conservation and like habitat protection and stuff. So day to day, it can look quite varied. And I would say no 2 weeks are the same, which is very nice. And I think that's true in private sector and in my job in the trust. And you can pretty much split that up by like survey work and then desk work. It's probably like a 60-40 split, desk work to surveys, but obviously the surveys are like the juicy bit that you might like want to sell in a webinar. So most of this really focuses on the surveys. But I've got some pictures here of sort of like different types of surveys that you might be on. They're all quite small, so they're a bit hard to see. But this could, if I move my mouse, can people see it, Becky? Okay, cool. So this here is an endoscope to look inside crevices for bats. So that's a bat survey. This tiny one here is someone putting up a barn owl box. This sort of green haze is Japanese knotweed, which is an invasive species, and you might have heard of already. So sometimes we have to do invasive species surveys to identify them and suggest recommendations for how to manage them or remove them. This here is a reptile tray for a reptile survey. I've actually never done a reptile survey myself, but I wanted to include it because it is part of the range. And the fact that I've never done one, I think, is quite a good example of how varied it can be. So some people have done lots. I've never done one. This here is probably the bread and butter. This is a bat survey. So this is a night vision camera, and it's looking at this brick structure here to see if anything is going to fly out of it. That'll be at dusk. This is, I think, a section of the River Gowie. Jack, I don't know if you recognise it. Sometimes people do river condition assessment surveys. I personally also don't do those, but they can be a part of the job. This is someone handling a great crested newt. We do quite a lot of newt surveys. This is me with my trusty bramble bashing stick. There is a lot of trying to get to ponds through a lot of bramble scrub. This is doing a quadrat, within a botanical survey, so seeing what species are present within this metre square. And then this, again, too small, but is a tiny little sample of water vole poo, which is the main way that you survey water voles. So there's some like good examples of the types of survey work you might be doing. Other things that aren't on here, badgers, otters, birds. There's probably more that I'm not even thinking of, but they're all there. And then in terms of desk work, it's mostly report writing. There might be some other stuff around that, but you know, writing up the findings of the surveys, recommendations for how to avoid or mitigate harm. There's also something that I haven't got into here, but is like crucial to most ecologists now, called biodiversity net gain, where any new developments have to prove a 10% increase, minimum 10% increase in biodiversity, either through on-site or off-site provision. And that is a big bulk of the desk work that we do as well. You can also sometimes, if you do find species and sadly the developer needs to remove their home or habitat, then there'll be like mitigation licenses that you have to help them apply for as well. So that's a whistle-stop tour of some of the things that we do. How did I get here? There's a lot of information on this page. I'm not going to go through all of it step by step, but I really kind of wanted to point out that there's, I think, 3 key themes to how I got here. And the first and probably most obvious is jobs. So that is a brief overview of my employment history. Within that, maybe I just wanted to point out that I'm a career leaver too. I worked in social impact for 5 years before I kind of wanted to get back to ecology, which was what I had in mind initially. And there was a few reasons for that, which I might get to later. But doing it this way was so helpful for me, because even though they're not technical skills, the things that I learned in this job are like unbelievably priceless. I gained so much confidence in myself. I had a manager who was really supportive, and he really taught me to like believe in myself, and he taught me how to handle myself and how to operate in a workplace environment and with clients and in consultancy as well, very crucially, managing your own workload, managing your own time, being like quite sort of self-responsible, really. So that was great. And then I moved to a seasonal position. That was a 6-month position, which is, I think, seasonal work is how you start out in ecology for most people. Maybe there are graduate jobs, but seasonal is more typical because there's more work over the summer. And then that developed into a permanent position, and then eventually to Cheshire Wildlife Trust. So qualifications are obviously also really important. I think most ecologists probably have a relevant degree, whether that's undergrad or masters. I'm sure there are occasions where people haven't, but I haven't come across it yet. I think there probably are other ways. Passed my driving test. That is that. I mean, I did it at 25 as well, which I also wanted to highlight. I didn't get it straight away, and a large part of why I didn't go into ecology or the environmental sector when I left uni was I just I couldn't drive, and I couldn't afford a car. So that's another thing that this job gave me, was the like space to be able to pay for those things essentially. The other qualifications I mentioned here are more sector specific. So a CSCS card is a card that you need to get to be able to work on construction sites. A part of the job, which I didn't even mention earlier, is basically being like a supervising ecologist on construction sites. So if they did come across, let's say, a newt, you can advise on like the best practice. Do we stop works? Do we move works away from that area? What's going on there? Another important one was a field identification skills certificate, which is a qualification in botanical expertise. So being able to identify different plant species and families and things like that. And then also professional membership, which well, no, it is crucial. I was going to say unfortunately, but I don't think that's true. It's less, fun in the terms of like the things that we all enjoy doing, but professional membership does have a lot of benefits, and it does give you a lot of sort of a leg up really in the professional world. And then lastly, volunteering, which I think is honestly just as important, because that's what shows that you're passionate. Ecology is full of people who are like real nerds about their like specific interests, which is great. And so a lot of the time, especially early careers, if you can prove that you are already interested in this stuff and you're not just doing it to get a job, it weirdly helps you get a job. And so, yeah, just have a think about all of those things. I think they all add up and they can all really help you. And then also in ecology, I think maybe this isn't true for everyone, but for me, I think it is very important. Like the learning never stops. So there's always something you can be doing to improve your knowledge. And if you're the kind of person who loves learning, then it's going to be great. So in my like next 2 years, these are the big things I want to achieve. So my field identification skills certificate level is currently a 3, and I'm trying to get that up to a 4. I can tell you more about that if you're interested. Maybe message me privately after this. I want to get my Great Crested Newt license this year, which is again just another qualification. It means that you're qualified to handle newts and conduct newt surveys safely without harming Great Crested Newts. I want to upgrade my SAME membership. I should have said SAME stands for the Chartered Institute for Ecologists and Environmental Managers. So it's worth checking out if you're interested in that. So I want to go from qualifying to associate. This is the list they've got there. And then I want to start thinking more about landscape scale habitat management. So I'm getting better at identifying things, but there's a bigger picture that all of these little plants are clues to like what the wider landscape is like and what that habitat is like. And I really want to develop that. And then my last thing is I work for a trust, so I'm very passionate about protecting nature and I want to get more involved in that in my local area and community. I can talk about that more later if you have questions. I talk about it all the time. So my key advice, which is probably the thing I should spend the most time on, and I really do hate to say it, but the main thing is to be an ecologist, you have to be able to drive. We go to remote sites all the time and there's just no way to do it by public transport. And I'm like so aware that it's completely like a class divide and it costs so much money to learn to drive. It's just such a frustration. So if your career path is that you do something else for a while you pay for that, then that's totally fine. The next thing I'd say is just find local groups and get stuck in. I mentioned it further up, but I've joined every group that's available to me. I'm based in Liverpool, so I've joined all of these guys, and I'm sure there's more that I didn't think of. And just yeah, like there's so many passionate people that want to share their knowledge, and doing those things really shows that you like really mean it and you really care about doing well. And then maybe just be adaptable, be patient, and be kind to yourself. These things don't happen overnight. I hope I've shown that my career path wasn't straightforward. It can feel like you're really like scaling a mountain when you're first starting out, and it's okay. That's okay. It doesn't have to be immediate, like, and that's okay too. And then lastly, ask for help. I think sometimes there's a feeling of like vulnerability that you don't want to ask for help because you think, you know, you're still early and it's a bit embarrassing to feel like you're not like you're going up to people and asking for help when you haven't got any like justification or qualification to do that. In my experience, a lot of the time people want to help you. Like it's an honor to be asked. And that kind of feeling of inadequacy, it will go away the more you speak to people. So reach out, message people, email people, give it a go. And it will pay off as well. People really do want to help and they will connect you if they can. Oh, that's the end of me. Sorry. I'll pass over to Jack.
Thank you so much, Robyn. That was absolutely fantastic. Thank you. I could relate to so many different things you were saying in there, especially about how, you know, even different jobs that are completely unrelated to conservation and how valuable they were and how you could pull learnings and experiences from that and you can apply them in your day job. So yeah, lots of claps. I think everyone really enjoyed that. So thank you so much, Robyn. That was really helpful. So yeah, I will now pass over to Jack Helsby, who is our Senior Living Landscape Officer. So over to you, Jack, if you want to take control of the screen at the top.
Evening, everybody. Yeah, so as Becky said, I'm Senior Living Landscape Officer here at Cheshire Wildlife Trust. And if you're like 90% of the population, you're probably thinking, that sounds great. What does that mean? I suppose I'll start by introducing the concept of a living landscape. So the Wildlife Trust, we're really fortunate to have these great nature reserves that are, you know, full of biodiversity, but we realise that we can't solve the problem of nature recovery with just nature reserves alone. So the idea of the living landscape was a term adopted by the Wildlife Trust following the Lawton report in 2010, which basically set out key principles of nature recovery at scale. Those being, it needs to be more nature, bigger, better, and better connected. So I suppose that's a good way of introducing what I do within Cheshire Wildlife Trust, because I manage the nature reserves that you can see on the slide here. They're all based within the Gowie catchment. So the River Gowie is a 36-ish kilometre river just east of Chester. And we've got our biggest nature reserve, Gowie Meadows, at the bottom of the catchment, right near Stanlow Oil Refinery. So it's bordering a landfill, an oil refinery, a motorway, and a massive sewage work. So it just proves that you can have really biodiverse nature even in the most unlikely of spaces. And within this catchment, we've also got two other nature reserves: the newly acquired Picton Pastures Nature Reserve and the Hocknell Platts Nature Reserve. And they're all sort of bordering the River Gowie and floodplain environments. So part of my role is to oversee the management of those nature reserves. They are quite agricultural environments as well as being biodiverse, rich nature reserves, and also get involved with some of our habitat creation and restoration projects on third-party land as well. So working with a lot of farmers and other landowners, working with partner organisations to deliver nature recovery at scale that's connected to our nature reserves. So those ideas of having these core sites that you can then buffer with more habitats and then connect those dots over the landscape. The Gowie catchment is somewhere that we've been working in for way beyond my time at the Trust. I think it's been over 2 decades now, and it's one of our 3 key focus areas going forward. So it's an area that we're really invested in. Gowie Meadows is lucky enough to host species like water vole and otters, marsh harriers. We've got over 100 different bird species on site, so it really is a great place to work. So what does my role actually involve? It is so varied on a day-to-day, week-by-week basis, and it's something that I really have trouble communicating. So I'll just take you through some of the key elements. So a lot of my work involves wetland and river restoration, as well as some of the day-to-day management on our nature reserves. So it involves working with contractors, big bits of machinery in very muddy, very sensitive sites. So that comes with its own unique set of challenges. Some of the legislation that Robyn touched on earlier, navigating those pieces of legislation and showing that you're going to be working in a sensitive way requires permits sometimes. If you're working around main statutory watercourses, so main rivers, you'll need like flood risk activity permits, and then working with big bits of kit and on sites where there's public access also requires a good in-depth knowledge of health and safety, and managing those contractors so that everybody's safe while on site. And this also goes for third-party land as well. So some of the photos that I've included inside are a mixture between some of the day-to-day management activities I undertake on nature reserves, and then ponds and wetland creation on other people's land as well. It also involves management plans. So when working on our nature reserves, we identify key features for conservation value, and we monitor those features to inform our management going forward. So we really want to link our management activities with beneficial aspects of the nature reserve. So we want to monitor anything that we've done. Is that having the desired impact on the species and the habitats present on site? And that one of the things that's a useful tool for that is mapping and good GIS knowledge. So especially working across landscapes and other parcels of land, that's been a really useful tool to help communicate the management to contractors and partners and landowners. Working to budgets as well with often a lot of the habitat creation and restoration works that I'm involved in is grant funded, maybe for a year, 2 years, 3 years. So there's often a bit of working to budgets and planning projects in advance. It's worth noting as well that partnership working is a real core aspect of my role. Anything in sort of river catchments, there's a catchment partnership for most, if not all, river catchments in the country, where it brings together all different non-government organisations and public and government organisations that work in those catchments for nature recovery and the benefit of the water environment. And that has a big part to play in what we're doing, especially if we're working over a river catchment. There's many different interested organisations in restoring nature at scale in these environments. So that's been a big part of my role, and as well as managing different stakeholders. So I work with, as I mentioned, work with farmers, landowners, work with farmers and graziers on our nature reserves, as well as partner organisations, volunteers as well involved in monitoring the key features on site. So it really is a quite a varied role. It can vary so much day to day. I was and just doing things that you never thought you'd be doing. So I was, out on site last week, meeting people, learning about pylons, because we've got a site where we're going to be creating a wetland, and there's big pylons overhead, and we need to know how we get contractors with big bits of kit under those pylons and working safely around them. So I can just pick a random day like that and think, I never thought I'd be learning about pylons stood in the middle of a field, but here I am. This career never ceases to amaze me, all the different random things that I end up getting involved in. So it really is quite varied. And one of the things I wanted to touch on is that the working on some of these floodplain sites and rivers brings its own challenges. It doesn't always go quite to plan, especially if you're working with grant funding or timelines. So I just wanted to highlight that on the next slide. We've got a picture of that nature reserve I mentioned earlier, Gowie Meadows. That site is about 160 hectares. So I'm not quite sure what that is in swimming pools or football pitches, but it's quite a lot. And this picture at the top right here shows it like almost a meter underwater completely. And at this time I had contractors on site actually, with machines stranded for about a week before the water levels receded down. So working around these challenges all brings lessons, but you kind of get to the point where you realize it will work out in the end, and you've got to trust the process. So some of these before and after pictures highlight that as well. In the winter, a lot of the work that I'm involved in is done in the sort of autumn and winter time when it is a bit more wet and muddy, and that's part of those mitigation measures that I mentioned earlier about not disturbing the key species and habitats on site. So you can end up with that picture on the top left there that looks like a crater, but then 15 months later in the next summer, a year on, it's a pond that's establishing, and we can really look forward to monitoring the species that arrive in those ponds. Similar with that track there, that's one of the main entrance tracks to Gowie Meadows Nature Reserve. It just looks like the Somme when the work's happening, and then ends up looking like a really nice accessible entrance to one of our flagship nature reserves. So you kind of have to take the rough with the smooth sometimes and trust that it will work out, and almost work alongside nature in some ways. That pond that you see there that had no sort of planting or anything supplementary added, that's all natural regen within 1 year. So I think that's a pretty good example of how keeping those sites and those examples in mind for me is really important, because especially when working on other people's land, people are quite precious about their land and their farms. It's their livelihood at the end of the day. And if we say we can create some fantastic habitats and then that's how we end up leaving the site, we've got to demonstrate that it will come right in the end. So yeah, I just wanted to highlight that part of my role as well. And because I like rivers, I've chosen to sort of highlight my career in conservation as a sort of meandering path, because I think that, to touch on some of the points that Robyn made earlier, I can see various points in my career where I've worked on different things and had different roles, working on different habitats, but I think that along the way I've picked up transferable skills that have helped me to get to where I am now and still help me in my role. So I started with a degree in wildlife conservation and ecology at Chester, and then I was lucky enough to be able to volunteer for groundwork and Cheshire Wildlife Trust, and that taught me how the basics of practical habitat management with that good background knowledge from my degree. But it wasn't until volunteering that I really took off in terms of my learning. I'm working with volunteers, and then that led to me becoming a volunteer trainee at Cheshire Wildlife Trust, being involved with assisting with grant funded projects, working on our nature reserves, leading volunteer groups was a big step. And that was that. Thankfully, at that time, that role came with a bit of a training budget, so I was able to get key qualifications for working on nature reserves, such as chainsaw qualifications, pesticides and brush cutters, along with some others. And the skills that I developed in that traineeship really helped me to move into a temporary contract living landscape officer role. And that was working on invasive species and some of our wetlands work in the Delamere area. And that really got me working with contractors, nature reserves, management plans, that idea of partnership working. Eventually got involved with helping out with some bat surveys as well. I just sort of threw myself at as much as I could at that time, and it was kind of at that point in my career where I was figuring out what I wanted to do within the organisation, because conservation is quite broad. So I think that's one thing that's benefited me, is that I've just been able to gain lots of experience in lots of things, bit of a jack of all trades, but take those key lessons with me to the next role. So in that living landscape officer role, I was managing a suite of woodland reserves and working with partners on some natural flood management works. And those skills then helped me get the senior living landscape officer role, and that's much more like landscape scale conservation, managing projects and working with contractors. Then I got my accreditation in river condition assessment. So Robyn mentioned that earlier. The picture of the River Gowie was near Picton pastures, I think. So yeah, I think along the way, although my job and my career path has changed slightly, working on different sites, different priorities, different projects, I can see how those roles have helped me gather the transferable skills into the next role. And I think that's a really important thing to take forward if you want to get involved in conservation, is that there's lots of different roles within conservation and even outside of conservation that you can gain transferable skills and really put yourself in the best position to go for a role in conservation. So finally, my advice would be, well, one of them, which I haven't really touched on, I suppose, is that if you, especially with landscape scale conservation, I'm working in the third-party sites sort of territories that I work in. A good working knowledge of UK agriculture is something that goes a long way, I think, because it's so intertwined with what we're trying to do in terms of nature recovery, and it's not really spoken about at degree level or volunteering level, and it can be really overlooked. But we've got a sort of, if we want to recover nature at scale, we also need to produce food, and agriculture is very much part of our landscape. So we need to know how to navigate that best. And if you want to restore habitats on third-party land, it has to sort of fit in with those individual farm businesses, and gaining the knowledge of what's out there, the sort of the underlying principles behind UK agriculture and its mechanisms, I think is a really beneficial bit of knowledge to have. It's really tied in with nature conservation in the UK. And then I hate to be the one to say it, but volunteer when possible, because I think that's kind of quite a cliche when talking about conservation careers, and that's why I've put if possible, because I recognise that it is quite it's not something that everybody can do, especially with the cost of living. So I think that brings the next point into focus, is consider roles with transferable skills. So going back to what Robyn mentioned about some of her previous roles that wasn't in conservation, there's skills there that she's applied to her role now, that are massively beneficial. So, you know, if there's plenty of examples out there of roles that could, you know, help you with transferable skills, project management, you know, health and safety, risk assessment, that could be applied to conservation. And then adaptability, you know, that point about becoming a jack of all trades, just get involved and see what works for you, see what you enjoy, and that commitment to continuous learning. I think that's something that we all have here, is that it's every day is a school day. I'm constantly asking my colleagues their opinion on things. It's not a weakness to not know the answer. It's a constant evolving process, and just having that almost like a level of humility to just say, I don't know the answer. I'm going to find out, and can keep improving and keep learning as much as you can. And then finally, just digital skills and GIS, because that's something that's really beneficial. Just a basic knowledge of, you know, digital. I think that most people are pretty good at digital skills these days, but GIS has been something that I've just taught myself along the way in my career. My degree didn't necessarily cover much GIS, but it's something that I was interested in my career, and it's really helped me to communicate our habitat creation and nature reserve management, especially with partner organisations. So that's it for me.
You're on
Becky,
mute,
you're
Becky.
on mute.
Busy chatting away while on mute. Sorry, I thought I clicked it. I was just saying that was absolutely fantastic, Jack. Thank you so much. Yeah, definitely some really similar themes with what Robyn was saying, about having to be sort of remain adaptable and open to new experiences, and just you know, open to exploring whatever comes your way, and knowing that that could one day become a really useful skill. And again, yeah, volunteering is a difficult one, isn't it? But like when you're saying about how you, where after your degree started volunteering at Cheshire Wildlife Trust, and then a few years later you were, you know, leading volunteers, it's quite useful to have that perspective and that experience. So yeah, absolutely amazing. Thank you so much, Jack. So yeah, and then the last but definitely not least, I will hand over to my colleague Faye Kelland, who is our Wilder Communities Officer in our advocacy team. So thank you very much, Faye.
Good evening, everyone. It's really nice to hear what colleagues are up to as well, because we don't always actually get the time to sit and listen. So that's been also super interesting for me. So I'm a Wilder Communities Advocacy Officer at Cheshire Wildlife Trust, and this is actually a relatively new role. The advocacy team was formed in April last year, so this kind of goes to show that the sector's always changing. This isn't a standard thing across trusts or across organisations, so you never know what's going to crop up in the field of the environmental sector. So part of our team, we advocate on many different issues, and our team is quite varied. So we have our planning officer is based in our team. So that's responding to things like planning applications, which is actually, it's a huge area of conservation, like empowering communities to respond to those as well. So for those thinking about advocacy, planning is a really good route into that. It can be a little dry. I used to work for developments in planning, and there's lots of kind of opportunities in those areas, but it can be a really powerful tool in advocating for the environment and for wildlife. So sometimes it can sound a bit dry, but you can have really impactful change because of that. So yes, it can sometimes involve distilling a lot of dry information into interesting things that people want to engage with. So if you're, if you're creative and you're thinking about having more creative pursuits in this industry, again, it can sound quite dry, but that can be a really great way into looking at really dry, boring things that people don't associate with, and then making it fun and interesting. And to kind of demonstrate this, I've, for full clarity, I like creative pursuits, but don't have any background in kind of graphic designing. So again, I think it's an area that's going to become more and more needed as more people like me try and do it and fail miserably. So if you're creative, this can be a really interesting way into it, where we make resources. So one thing I've been working on lately is making resources to empower communities to campaign on issues that they care about. So we're a small trust, we can't campaign on everything. So we focus on kind of very large issues, but we have lots of knowledge in our team on how to campaign and what that looks like. And so we're creating resources that we can share. So that's been a nice, fun, creative project for myself. That's also been talking to lots of people about their campaigns, what's worked, what hasn't. And then creating things like social media graphics that go out to gain momentum surrounding our campaigns, and things like that. Other things that we're involved with, and again can kind of come with if you're, you know, quite a potentially more extroverted person, or you like to get really involved in communities and that kind of working. I got to go to the IPBES plenary session, which I had never heard of until I was invited to it, but it's always great to say yes to these opportunities, even if you don't 100% know what it is, because you never know what you could learn there. And I had a great time. It was an international biodiversity conference where, you know, governments from across the world were talking about meaningful change in the biodiversity sphere and funding research for that. It was a little bit like Eurovision at times because they would throw to different countries. So that was also quite exciting just to experience. And our CEO went, and a cohort of what we're calling younger people of the organisation, and it was just a really great opportunity to speak to people at that event as well. So I always would really encourage, if you get the opportunity to do things, just say yes, even if you go for an afternoon and it wasn't for you. One, you can put it on your CV and say that you've attended things like that, but also you never know who you might meet there. It's always great opportunities for networking. I've got an image of one of our community groups protesting as well. So this can be slightly controversial for charities and things like that who accept donations and rely on membership. But where it's done kind of lawfully and safely and with causes that really align with what we're trying to do, we really support these groups doing that. And we advise on how to do these things safely, and also, you know, share the information sometimes as well. So part of my role also involves going to speak to these community groups and finding out how they wish to be supported and where we can support them in what they want to do. So this, for example, is they're protesting the proposal for 20,000 new homes in an area of greenbelt, a really good quality greenbelt with ancient woodlands and ancient hedgerows. And of course, we also think that's not the best idea for wildlife and nature recovery, considering that we're the 12th most nature depleted country in the world. So this is where we can kind of bring our name and our scientific evidence and all the brilliant stuff that Jack and Robyn do and bring it all together and say, well, here's the stuff that we've done, here's what's worked, and here's how we would share that information. I've also I do a lot of talking, whether that be sitting down and having cups of tea with people. I do that a lot and I really enjoy it. I have a lot of calling people, talking to people, and lots of emailing as well. We have a campaign's email address and I respond to queries through there. And I speak to our planning officer a lot. So these kind of roles, it tends to be less like numerical based, but it's still part of the conservation jigsaw. It's a way of connecting people to green spaces around them, and, you know, ensuring, you know, the work that Jack's doing, that the local community knows about that and that they can enjoy those spaces as well. I'm going to do a little bit on the successful stuff that we've done and how that has, what we've done in our jobs to do that. So this was our neonics campaign that ran for a couple of years. So this was before I was even part of the trust. So even though the advocacy team has only just been formed, we've been doing advocacy for a long time. And this is all around using bee-killing pesticides. And every year the government was allowing it to be used for emergency circumstances, but we were saying, but if you do it every year, it's not really an emergency. It's, you know, it's a problem. And the timeline of this is kind of, it started back in 2019. and we started kind of putting pressure across the UK through the wildlife trusts to say that actually this is wrong, it's not good for nature, it's not good for nature's recovery. And you can see here some of the graphics that were made for that. So again, the more creative side of things, seeing what resonated with people, that got the message through, and it started to get a bit more shocking, and we found that worked and didn't upset people. So, you know, there was lots to be learned there. And then there was an awful amount of lobbying going on. So the Wildlife Trust's advocacy team was speaking to MPs and members of Parliament, as well as our own teams internally. James, who's in our team, was working with local councils and really spreading that word. So again, as part of that job, it's knowing what's going on, getting that information, distilling it down, and saying to the MP, here's the crux of the matter and here's what we want to do. So again, it seems like it can be a bit wide, the remit of these kind of roles, where it's a lot more kind of social sciencey. But for people who really enjoy speaking to people and talking and that kind of thing, and gathering all this information and making it more kind of distillable, this could be like a really interesting career path in terms of advocacy and community working. And in the end, time really helped us. So we started back in 2019, and in January 2025, they said no to the industry request. And I believe they did in 2026 as well. So it goes to show that over time, sometimes it's a long game, and it's having that kind of faith in the process, as Jack said, kind of trust the process with these things. And it worked, but that involved an awful lot of lobbying, which goes on behind closed scenes, but is really, really important. And again, it's becoming a bigger presence in the UK. I think we've seen things like Extinction Rebellion, where, you know, that pressure has led to conversations happening in places you wouldn't necessarily expect. So how I got into this, similar to Jack, I kind of identify with the jack of all trades, master of none. So I started as the role was called a biodiversity coordinator, but what that actually meant was I was a landscaper. So I worked on new build sites, putting in gardens, but all the while trying to encourage the great landscaping company that I worked for at the time. They were really into biodiversity practices, and they wanted someone internally to start like looking at that and enacting biodiversity action plans. So that's where I started, and it was not what I had envisaged, having just graduated with from my physical geography degree. I didn't think I'd be landscaping, but it gave me so many great opportunities and tools to understand what land management was. And if I was to ask people to put in habitats, I knew what that meant because I'd dug ponds and put things like that. And I got that job through working at a part-time job and catching a landscaping team cheating. So you never know. This is whether, if you speak to people and you talk to people about what you're interested in, you never know what could happen. And then worked in the private sector for a short time, in planning, working on the developer side of things. I'll say, if you're interested in graduate schemes and things like that, big multinational companies like Stantec and Amy and Stellantis, there's loads of big international companies. Look at graduate schemes. Some of them are great. Some of them might speak to you. They can be a really great tool to get into industries that can be quite difficult to get into. And particularly, you know, if you need that stability, they can be really, really useful for that. So yeah, always just keep an eye out for those opportunities. And then now I'm a Wilder Communities Officer. And again, with this job, I first accepted it on a 6-month contract. It was a bit of a leap of faith to see whether or not I was going to stick it out, whether there would be funding for me after. And I'm really happy to say I'm still here a couple of years later. So again, look for opportunities. And if you are being able to take risks on some things can really pay off sometimes. We've talked about volunteering quite a lot. I've also volunteered in the past. I'm not volunteering so much now as priorities have shifted, but again, I'd really recommend it. And to say I was active in these volunteers, but I wasn't necessarily like the most active person. Don't feel like you have to go to everything or do everything or attend everything, even if like you are now attending online webinars, that's great. It's all experience. It's all good to hear and get connections and things like that. So my last kind of advice page, So use LinkedIn to find jobs you might be interested in. I never heard of any of the jobs I ever had before I had them. I didn't ever think, oh, I want to be a biodiversity person. I want to be a wilder communities person. I knew I wanted to do something environmental, and that's about as far as I knew. I didn't know whether that was going to be in planning or doing consultations for developments. I had no idea. So also find interesting people online. There's people I follow just because I'm really interested in their job. It doesn't necessarily mean I want to do their job, but it can give you an insight into areas that you never knew existed. I've put volunteer if you can. Like Jack's point, it can be a luxury with time. I would say graduates and people who are still in university, that can be a really great time to volunteer. You know, if people are looking to assist in bat surveys, I know a lot of students are really great at staying up really late at night. So that's a really good way to get into that. And look at job websites to see what opportunities there are. So I just went onto environmentaljobs.com, pressed go, and entry level, because they have an entry level one you can select. And these 3 things popped up, all really different things. I wouldn't have said, oh, there's definitely flood defence team members about, and it allows you to get an idea of what's out there and can help you look for volunteering opportunities related to what's out there. And the very last thing I'll say is priorities change. So I used to volunteer a lot. I used to be a lot more active in things. This is me and my daughter at one of Becky's events, learning about fungi. And sometimes just enjoy the things you enjoy, because they can inform your career. So, you know, I've always enjoyed being outside, and that has led me to having a career that, although I'm not as outside as much as I'd like to be, I protect natural environments. So it's okay if your career isn't your most important thing at any one time. Try and just revisit the things that you're interested in any way you can, because that can inform your decisions. So sorry, I know that was a bit whistle stop, but any questions, stick them in the chat.
Thank you so much, Faye. That was brilliant. You painted us such a vivid picture of your job, and your advice was absolutely spot on. I couldn't have said it better myself. Thank you so much. Right, I'm just going to take control back of the screen. So I appreciate we're only a few minutes off 8, but in a few minutes we'll try and have a Q&A. So if you want to pop any questions in the Q&A, do that now. And if you want to ask someone specific, maybe just make it clear that it's for either Jack, Robyn or Faye. If you can't see the Q&A because you're on a phone, you can write them in the chat, and my colleague Kelly will move them over. And while you write your questions down, I just wanted to draw your attention to some helpful resources that I'll try and send out in the next few days. And I know some of my colleagues already mentioned some of these, but there are some fantastic job websites over there. I hadn't heard of a lot of these before I started looking, and I've definitely found jobs through these. It's worth signing up to their mailing lists. So you can get regular updates on jobs, and you can often filter it by sector level, you know, what area of the UK. If you're still trying to decide what type of job you want to go for, I really like this website. It's called Green Jobs for Nature, and they have a section all about different roles and real life stories from people working in the sector. So more stories like from this evening. And then there's lots of online free learning here, which I would recommend as well. I mentioned at the start, but if you want advice on CV writing, cover letters, interviews, traineeships, I'd encourage you to watch back our part 1, which is on our YouTube channel, and I will send a link afterwards. Some of our panel, well, pretty much all of our panel mentioned volunteering and getting involved in a local project. As Faye said, you know, it doesn't have to be loads. I think just dipping your toe in here and there is a great opportunity to figure out what you might want to go into. And we've recently launched this community map tool on our website, which I hope you find useful. There's so many amazing groups in Cheshire and the Wirral, and all of, you can sort of see our boundary here. Many of these groups are so knowledgeable about habitat management and creation, and you could learn a lot from them, and you could gain a lot of transferable skills. You're also welcome to join our mailing list, and like I said at the start, this is sort of a collective network of people, strangers really, people from all sorts of walks of life, who have one sort of thing in common, which is they want to see wildlife recover. So please get involved if that sounds like a bit of you. And we're also on Facebook. I also, this is really random, but just because we've got a webinar full of sort of people at the start of their career, we're considering running a scything taster day for young people aged 18 to 34, and we're thinking of running it on a day over the Easter holidays next month. And I'm going to see if I can get a poll going. Let's see if this works. Hang on. But yeah, basically, would anyone be interested if we launched it? Okay, there's a few thumbs up, which is coming. Let's see if I can get the poll to work. Can anyone see the poll? Okay. I'll leave the poll up, and can we see the poll? Sorry. Yeah. Yeah, fabulous. Great. I'll leave it up for a minute. It'd be really, really useful to know if people would be interested in this kind of thing. Anyway, questions. I realise we're a minute to wait, so if anyone wants to stay on to listen to these questions, that would be great. We had a few people wrote in beforehand, so I'll do a few of those and then a few of the ones from our Q&A tonight. So the first question: with all potential employers requiring experience to get an entry-level job, please can you give examples of how to get experience in advocacy and policy? And I mean, I thought, Faye, that was like written for you, I think.
Yeah, so advocacy, I would say find causes you're interested in, and even if you're just on Facebook supporting those causes, it's experience and seeing how that's done. So it could be, you know, like our causes, for example, you can always offer help with that. So you could be asked to make graphics, or even if you share it on your sorry, my cat's caught. So yeah, advocacy wise, it is, even if you're online, you can still get involved with advocacy there. I think policy wise, again, even things like just getting used to planning portals. Every council is different, every council has different policies, and just being aware of what policies there are. In the nature sphere, like the local nature recovery strategies have recently just been released. There are local plans that all councils have. And even if it's just being aware of what they are, when you then go into job interviews and you're saying things like that, they're really common things that are across all. And when they're asking, oh, do you have experience, you can say, yes, I have experience in like reading LNRSs or local plans or things like that. So I totally appreciate, I've been in a similar position where they're asking for 2 years experience and you're like, but this is a job to get that experience in. But just trying to be aware of the skills that you might need for that job, and being aware of legislation, like Robyn mentioned as well, can be a really powerful tool in showing that you have, you know, the practical knowledge and experience of working those kind of portals can be really, really useful.
That's a great answer. Thanks so much, Faye. Robyn, did you want to mention something as well?
Yeah, really quick. If I can just do a quick plug. One of our campaigns with Cheshire Wildlife Trust is the Mersey Tidal Barrage at the moment, and I'm a part of a group that's like planning like some campaigning on that. So if anyone is interested in that and you happen to be on or near Merseyside, maybe give me an email after this. I'll put my email in the chat, because you could get involved with that campaign with us, and that would probably give you some experience if that's what you're interested in.
Amazing. Thanks, Robyn. Yeah, that's such a good point. And I'm sure, yeah, I would encourage everyone to reach out. That sounds great. I'll do another question from some of the ones we had earlier. So what skills or career choices help you to stay field-based for as long as possible? Jack, I don't know if you want to have a crack at that one.
Yeah, sure. I think with field-based work, the foundation of that is a good understanding of what habitat management is and what different habitats require in terms of managing them, working around and mitigating for key species and timings, especially with works involving avoiding nesting birds, breeding birds season, and then just trying to find opportunities that would give you qualifications in things like equipment like chainsaws and brush cutters, using trailers, driving 4x4s off road, even just working with hand tools. So, as simple as, how to use a hammer or a saw. It's all valuable experience. So I think getting involved with any kind of opportunity like that gives you a foundation of knowledge like that can be a really useful tool for going into fieldwork and staying into fieldwork. So if that's something that you want to do, if you want to work outdoors, learning about how to manage habitats, when to manage them, and how to use equipment to do so, that's a really strong foundation.
That's great advice. Thanks so much, Jack. That's a really good answer. I'll do one more question from some of the previous ones. Someone's asked, what opportunities are there for city dwellers to move into conservation? Is it easier if you live in more rural areas? Robyn, I didn't know if is this one for you, do you think?
Yeah, I'd say it's not, there's no difference. It really does just come down to, can you drive? Do you own a car? All of my like ecology related work and volunteering, my first volunteering opportunity was in Lee, just outside Wigan. And I've lived in Liverpool my whole life, and then I had a job in Warrington, and now I've got my job with Cheshire Wildlife Trust, and now our office is like South Cheshire. So you just have to be prepared. And also we work all over Cheshire, and in my last job I worked all over the northwest. So it doesn't, for me, it doesn't really matter where you live. You just have to be you have to be able to afford to drive, basically, and confident driving.
Yeah, such a good point. Faye, did you have something to say on that as well?
Yeah, just on that, in terms of the difference as well, if it's to do with volunteering as well between city and rural, I would say if you join local volunteering groups, oftentimes they'll car share to things as well. So if you're not at the stage where you're looking for a career in it, because when I used to live in Reading, I lived in central Reading, and I didn't have a car, but all the volunteering was in Oxfordshire and stuff, and they would arrange for transport for those as well. So yeah, if you get connected to those groups, quite often they're aware that that's a problem as well. So always worth just asking your local networks if anyone's going that way or can help.
Yeah, absolutely. And I know plenty of people at Cheshire Wildlife Trust who can't drive, but we sort of set up carpooling. There's definitely ways around it. Thank you very much, both of you. There's a question here for Faye. Faye, what organisation did you mention for the graduate scheme, please?
So I responded in the chat, so if anyone else is interested, but what my answer was large environmental consultancies, the big international ones, they all tend to do them. Even other companies who you might not think of environmental will have opportunities, but the ones off the top of my head I could remember were like BSG Ecology, Stantec, Amy. And I'd advise use the job websites, look at the companies that have loads of roles. They tend to be bigger companies, and look on their websites and just search graduate on their website and see if they have anything. And email, don't just wait for job opportunities to pop up. I'd say reach out and say, I'm a graduate, I'll be graduating then. And sometimes they'll put you on lists ahead of their graduate intake to show that you're keen and interested. So Google's your best friend in those situations, but I put the ones that I could remember. There's loads on them.
Thank you, that's great. Yeah, it's so true, isn't it? Just making your voice heard, so they're aware of you, so that you're on their radar, really. Robyn, did you want to come in as well on that?
Yeah, maybe two things on that. I would say like employers love it when you show initiative. It's almost like you're like doing some of their work for them, because you're proving that you are like really committed and you really want this. But also grad schemes can be really competitive, so if you are applying to them and you're not getting them, like, don't be disheartened. There's just like thousands of people. I applied to a bunch and I never got one, and I'm doing all right.
That's great advice. Thanks, Robyn. We've got a few people in the Q&A who are asking for various links to be mentioned. I will send those all out afterwards. Things like volunteering opportunities and some of the accreditations that Robyn mentioned. We can send all of those out afterwards. So I think that might be all we have time for. We've gone over slightly, so thank you so much to all of you who stuck with us till the end. I think hopefully you can see that from all of our panel tonight, there's not really one set route into conservation. There's so many different ways to get involved. And as Robyn said at the start, you know, you can use different skills from previous roles, even if they're in a completely different field. And, you know, maybe you don't have a degree in ecology, but you're a really good communicator or a people person. You know, you might be able to help use your skills to raise awareness and sort of build nature connection. So yeah, thank you so much for joining us this evening. Thank you so much to our amazing panel who gave up their Wednesday night to talk to you about what they do for a living. I found it really interesting. It was really nice hearing a much more in-depth insight into all of their amazing jobs, and like hearing how they're all making a difference for nature in completely different ways, and that's great. So yeah, thank you very much, and yeah, hopefully see you all at another event soon. Thanks.